When we are talking about enhancing greenhouse gas or carbon uptake by natural and working lands, obviously we have to look at the greenhouse gas dynamics of the soils, and it does involve organic matter because photosynthesis is producing organic matter and it's respired by microbes and herbivores and other insects, earthworms, etc., etc. Okay, so why should we even care about soils? This is just an image showing and claiming soil is the basis for life on Earth. One can hardly argue with that. You have vegetation of some sort on top or no vegetation, and you have various levels of carbon being sequestered and stored away. We will see some basic properties and processes here from FAO. This is just showing the range of activities. So rain enters the ground, obviously very critical for recharging the water with the water needed for photosynthesis to be taken up by the roots. That's what the roots are trying to do in addition to all the nutrients they want to take up. Plant debris accumulates and eventually gets converted into what are called preformed nutrients like nitrate, carbon, phosphorus, other micronutrients needed for plants to grow. It's not just CO2 plus H2O in the photosynthesis. All these hard materials, just like human body needs all the minerals and vitamins, all living things need these as well, the algae in the ocean and vegetation on land. Worms churn, so they are a big part of converting hydrocarbons back into nutrients. Of course, they also respire and produce greenhouse gases, so they are part of the greenhouse gas dynamics. Microbes and fungi metabolize the carbohydrates. Roots weather minerals, so there is the chemical weathering where roots, you often see even moss or grass going on rocks and slowly eroding the top layer and converting it into soil. That's chemical biological weathering. Because roots have high CO2 and produce carbonic acid, they can accelerate weathering, and obviously it's producing minerals, which are a big part of the soil structure as well. Downward percolating water transports ions and clay. So clay is the finest soil that you can have. So typically you have silt, clay, and sand. So silt is less coarse than clay, and sand of course is quite coarse, and there is also loam, which is kind of a mix of these things. So ions and clay accumulate. Okay, these are critical for plant growth and terrestrial carbon cycle. So the horizontal designation is up here. So you typically have topsoil, transition, subsoil, weathered bedrock, and solid bedrock. So there is that interface which is getting weathered often by, you can see the roots in here. Okay, so there is constant production of inorganic carbon, typically minerals and so on. Soil horizons exposed on the wall in a gully of eastern Brazil. Grass is on top here, topsoil. You can see it's richer in carbon with the dark color. Transition, so depends on what minerals are being produced by these roots. You can see here coming quite deep. Subsoil and weathered bedrock. So you can see that this is bedrock, but it is slowly being degraded by carbonic acid and other processes. So global status of human-induced soil degradation. This is going from very high severity, moderate, low severity, stable land, ice cap, or non-used wasteland. So you can see that even Iceland has soil degradation. So US has various types of soils, various levels of agricultural activity. And you can see the corresponding soil degradation. Okay, rainy parts of Africa. Obviously, this is all desert here, so it is stable land. There are ice caps and other wastelands. This is all ice caps, all ice and snow and so on. There is permafrost here, as we will see a little bit later on, many places here. So different types of soils again. China shows massive regions of very high severity of soil degradation, a combination of population, high food production, and so on. So obviously these are critical places to worry about. This is another figure showing the soil functions. Soils deliver ecosystem services that support life on Earth. So they have roles to play in carbon sequestration, water filtering and contaminant reduction, climate regulations. Vegetation feedback is a huge part of modulating climate, water vapor content, carbon dioxide, and so on. Nutrient cycling, habitat for organisms, very rich biodiversity from microbes to various other herbivores and carnivores. Food regulation, source of pharmaceuticals and genetic resources. So lots of the pharmaceuticals depend on various chemicals that are derived from plants, shrubs, herbs, and so on. Foundation of human infrastructure. Obviously, we dig into the soil for foundations of bridges, buildings, roads, houses, homes, everything, right? Provision of construction material in terms of timber and sand and cement, and heritage and culture, obviously. Okay, they are also providing provision of food, fiber, and fuel. Okay, and we are talking about bending the curve, and we've been talking about social transformation, technological and science transformations needed. So everywhere we talked about market-based policies and command-based policies and so on. So if we convince ourselves in this chapter that soils have a big role to play in bending the curve, then we have to also worry about the governance, which we don't necessarily do in this chapter. So I added this little paper from Nature, which is just an opinion piece that talks about how most soils are in private ownership, making it tricky to implement binding international agreements. So one would have to hope that voluntary international agreements evolve to protect the ground beneath our feet from erosion and degradation. So obviously rich countries have to do it, but poor countries have to be incentivized to provide protection for the soils and reducing erosion. Just a little detail that, and in fact many countries like US, China, even India have bought huge amount of agricultural land in Africa for their own food security in the future. So can that serve as also a co-benefit of protecting soils and bending the curve, right? So food security is not only a global issue, because food insecurity in some place tends to lead to local instabilities in politics, which soon becomes a global problem, as we know from the Arab Spring and the droughts in Syria, ongoing war that never seems to end, and so on. So all these have to be related eventually through the social transformation and global agreements, even under Paris. So Paris actually needs to include soil in that sense, as has been written by others as well.